As a beginner to coloured pencils, it's really important to learn the foundations of how to use coloured pencils so that you know all the different techniques and effects you can get, but also so you know how to use them most effectively. In today's video, I'm going to be giving some simple tricks and techniques for how to blend coloured pencils for beginners. So if you're brand new to coloured pencils, this is definitely a video for you, and I really hope that it does help. Hi, I'm Amy, and if you are new around here, please make sure that you don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I have lots of art videos here every single week. I also have a Patreon page where I do things like colouring pages, mobile desktop wallpapers that you can download each month, as well as mindful art activities and lessons. So if that's something that interests you, make sure to check out the Patreon link down below. So without further ado, let's get on to today's video. As a beginner to coloured pencils, it's very important to learn the fundamental skills of how to use coloured pencils. So in order to do that, we've got to go right back to the beginning and learn how to blend coloured pencils. And I've got lots of different blending techniques to use for today's video. So let's start with layering and burnishing. Layering and burnishing is one of the most effective ways to blend coloured pencils because you're effectively layering lots of different colours of pencils, building up tone, value and contrast, and then applying a heavy pressure to your paper to cancel out any stubborn lines and the white grain of the paper. You first want to build your layers, so it's really important to start off by building light layers. That's going to allow you to build up from your light to mid to dark tones. You want to start off with your light tones first as well, because if you go in with a very heavy pressure or dark colours, it's going to be much more difficult for you to include lighter colours when you've gone in with a darker colour. So you always want to make sure that you are layering properly and following the correct course of layering, which would be to start off with light layers first, then build up to your mid-tones and then your dark tones. It's also really important to start with light layers first and make sure not to apply too much pressure too early on. If you apply too much pressure too early on, it will flatten the tooth of the paper and make it near impossible to add any more colours, pigmentation or layers over the top. So always build up your layers lightly. Now let's look at stop and start lines. This is one of the things that can affect your blending process. So if you have a lot of stubborn lines in your drawing, you're not going to get smooth blending results. And I'm going to show you an effective way to get rid of the stop and start lines. Firstly, you don't want to be doing this, which is where you're using back and forth motions to create blending, because what that's going to do is it's going to create stop and start lines. Every time you lift the pencil off the paper, you stop at your stop point, and then when you go back onto the paper and apply the pencil again, you're going to create the start lines. Instead, a more effective way of creating blending and shading would be to go in circular motions and keep changing the direction of your blending as well. So you can see here just how scratchy the results are. You're getting a lot of lines, the lines are very uneven, so there's no real even shading going on, and it's not going to create the consistent results that you're wanting. Because of the inconsistent shading, it also means that you're really not getting into the crevices of the paper. So you're going to be leaving a lot of white grain behind, and all that's really going to be there is stop and start lines, lots of marks on your paper, and it's just not going to give you a really nice result. So let's first of all look at using circular motions. Why are circular motions so important? Well, the main reason for this is because circles have no stop and start lines. So that means that you're going to be able to create smooth layers and soft results. By blending in circular motions, what it does is it allows you to rotate the pencil, and therefore as you're creating lines, it's going to cancel out the lines by going over them and smoothing them out. So it's very important to use circular motions, and I'm trying to do this slowly for you so you can see exactly how I use circular motions. And if you keep going with this, it's going to allow you to build up layers whilst also creating a lot of smooth blending results. You want to start off lightly with your circles as well. So another thing that will affect the results that you're going to get with blending is the way that you hold your pencil. Hand position is really important and it's sometimes overlooked. So for example, holding the pencil further down the pencil barrel compared to holding the pencil closer to the tip. Now if you hold your pencil further away from the pencil barrel, what this does is it allows you to have less control over the pencil, whereas if you're holding it very close to the tip, you're going to have more control over the pencil. So in order to achieve light shading and light layers, you want to be using your pencil further down the pencil barrel because you're going to have less control over the pencil, and when you want to go in and apply more pressure, you want to hold the pencil closer to the tip so that you have more control and can apply more pressure. So here you can see the difference between the light shading to the more concentrated shading, and it's just the way that I've used my hand position. So what about going in the opposite direction? So again, if you start and just go in one direction, then you're going to get a lot of start and stop lines. So in order to get rid of those stop and start lines and any stubborn marks, you want to be going in the opposite direction as well as using circular motions. By changing your direction frequently, what that's going to do is cancel out any stubborn lines. So if you've gone in one direction and you've got some stubborn lines there, then go in the other direction to cancel them out. So it's very important to keep changing the direction of your pencils. So you can see there that it's actually creating quite nice soft results and there's hardly any stubborn lines showing through. So this is a really effective way at getting those smooth and creamy blending results. And I'm also using sharp pencils to enable me to get into all the grain of the paper and all the little crevices of the paper as well, and that just helps me to create more even coverage. So let's talk about the pressure of the pencils. Now I did briefly mention this when I talked about hand position, but again, the way that you create pressure in your drawings and the changes of pressure is very important, particularly if you're wanting to add a lot of depth and dimension. It's very important to have a change in pressure there so that you can see the different variations of value and contrast. Value adds a lot of contrast to your drawing, so it's very important to have the variation of light to mid to dark tones to create that contrast in your drawing. And I've used some different colours there and mixed them together by creating that soft and subtle shading. Again, when I am putting this into practice, I'm starting off with a very light pressure on the pencil first to create the lightest layers, and then obviously building up on those layers, I just start to add a little bit more pressure the more layers that I add. And when I get to the final stages of layering, then I'm adding quite a lot more pressure, and you can see me putting that into practice in the drawings. So when I want to concentrate more of the paper and saturate it with more colour, I am going in and applying more of a pressure, but I'm just making sure to still have the undertones and all of those light layers first so that I don't lose any of my details. So what about blunt versus sharp pencils? So again, I've just briefly mentioned this, but there is quite a considerable difference between using blunt and sharp pencils. Now, you can still get really good results with using blunt pencils, and some people prefer to use blunt pencils. So if that's what you prefer to do, then by all means go ahead and do that. But on the whole, it is better to use sharp pencils. This is my pencil sharpener. This is one of my all-time favourite pencil sharpeners. This is the Derwent Superpoint manual sharpener. It is a helical sharpener and it sharpens my pencils to a very fine point. I personally prefer to use sharp pencils for blending because I find that it gets into all the crevices of the paper. Whereas with blunt pencils, I find them a lot harder to control, and I also get a lot of uneven results. It's very hard to actually shade over the paper and get consistent results because the pencils are blunt, so they just sort of glaze over the paper. But also you have to be careful with blunt pencils because as they become blunt, they can also become really scratchy. So there has been times when I've created scratch marks on my paper and it's been very hard to alleviate that. So you want to be careful with that. With sharp pencils, you get a lot more even results because you get smoother transitions of colour. It's easier to get into the crevices of the paper, so alleviate the white grain and stubborn lines. And I just find that all round, I personally get better results with sharp pencils. And you want to be using sharp pencils particularly if you are focusing on more detailed work, so for example animal drawings. But again, some people do prefer using blunt pencils. So let's take a look at wax versus oil. Again, some pencils are going to be better at blending than others, but it doesn't mean that you can't use one type of pencil and still not get good results, because you can. Typically, you're going to get better results with wax pencils than oil pencils, because with wax pencils, they are softer and creamier. With oil pencils, because they have a harder lead, it is typically harder to create that softness and that creaminess and blend the pencils to the same consistency as wax pencils. But it can be done, you just need a little bit more patience and a bit more layering as well. So with wax pencils, because they are a softer core pencil, it's much easier in terms of layering pencils down, mixing colours and blending colours, because they're a softer core pencil. So in general, these pencils are better for this type of technique with the actual blending. But it doesn't mean, like I said, that you can't create good results with oil-based pencils. Now, putting all of these things that we've learned into practice by using circular motions, focusing on our hand position, you can see the results we got with the wax pencils. Now with the oil pencils, you can see that it's not creating as much of an even coverage as the wax pencil, so there's a bit more white grain showing through, and it's a little bit harder, in my opinion, to create this softness that we've got with the wax pencils. I typically have to apply more layers in order to get a similar consistency to wax pencils, but it can still be done, and these pencils are still great for layering. So again, another thing to focus on is smudging. Now, even though wax pencils are better at blending than oil typically, they are notorious for smudging because they are a softer core. So as you can see there, as I apply my finger to the paper, it does smudge quite a lot. Whereas with oil pencils, it's definitely not as noticeable as wax. So that's something to bear in mind. If you've worked for ages on a drawing, just be careful not to rest your hand on your wax pencils too much, because it can smudge, and use a fixative to fix those drawings into place. Now with oil pencils, they are not as bad with smudging because they are a harder core, so it's not as easy to smudge them, but I would, for your own protection, just use a fixative spray as well in order to fix the drawings, because you do get a little bit of smudging here and there. So again, same rules apply. Although it's not as bad, you do want to be careful with resting your hand in your drawings and creating that smudging. So you can see the difference there. There is a considerable difference between the wax and the oil pencils. So another thing is wax bloom. So this is something to bear in mind when you're creating a lot of blending and you're wanting to blend your pencils. With wax pencils, you are going to get more of a wax bloom with them because of that waxy coating. Wax bloom is where, when you hold up your drawing to the natural light, you can see the glare from the pencil pigments. It is more noticeable with wax pencils than oils. So again, something to bear in mind if you've spent a long time on a drawing or you're creating a drawing for a client. It can be a little bit off-putting with the wax bloom, and obviously as you apply more layers, then the wax bloom can get worse as well. With oil pencils, there is still a little bit of wax bloom, but it's not as noticeable as the wax pencils because we obviously have a harder core, and these are oil-based pencils as well. So unfortunately, this is something that you can't really avoid, but it's something I just wanted to let you know, particularly if you've not used coloured pencils before and you're a beginner to them. This is something just to note if you're wanting to do lots of different drawings. So you can see there the slight difference between the wax and the oil pencils. So now let's take a little look at the colours for blending. So what sort of colours work well together? What are good colours for blending? And I've typically gone for colours that are of a similar value to each other. So we've got some blue colours there, red colours, and there's lots of different colours to choose from in terms of sets as well. And the other thing to point out is that you can mix different colours from different sets as well to create lots of different blending results. So I'm just doing some little examples here just to show you how well different colours mix and lay together. I'm just using some green colours here just to give you an example of how you can blend different colours together, and this is the Prismacolor pencils. I've tried to go for some light, mid and dark tones, and that's typically the best combination that I use because it creates that even and soft transition of colours rather than going from two extreme colours. It's always nice to have a sort of middle colour in there as well. You can also transition from one colour into another. So for example, we're going from sort of like turquoise into blue. So it's very easy to do this as well. And particularly when you're using a soft core pencil, it's very easy to go in and create an even distribution of colour and that transition of colour as well. So we're going from the greeny tones into blue tones. So if you have a limited palette, I would definitely recommend doing something like this, just experimenting with lots of different colours and colour combinations and mixing colours, because it can really help you to stretch your palette. You don't need a lot of pencils in order to create lots of different colour combinations. Even if you have just 10 different coloured pencils, you can create over 100 colours, and then that's not taking into consideration all the different tones and hues that you can create as well. You can literally have endless colours and tones just from a very small set of pencils. So you don't need to spend a lot of money in order to get a great variation of colours, and remember, the more colours that you have, the easier it's going to be to create lots of different blending techniques as well. So it's very important to mix colours and create that soft transition of colours as well. So you can see here how I'm also mixing in some earthy tones in with some more vibrant tones as well, just to create lots of different complexions, and this would be great for things like animal drawings and skin tones. So again, experimenting with lots of different colours and seeing what sort of colour combinations you can come up with is very important. Also, don't be afraid to mix different coloured pencil brands together as well. You absolutely can mix different pencil brands into each other. So even if you have oil pencils, you can mix them in with wax. You can mix different colour combinations together using different pencil brands. So there's no right or wrong way of doing this. So let's just put everything that we've learned into practice by creating this really colourful swatch here. And what I've done is I've focused on my hand position, the levels of pressure that I'm applying to the paper, the way that I'm layering colours, and also blending colours together. And then I'm using my circular motions and frequently changing the direction of my pencils in order to create this really soft and subtle shading and that transition of colour. So by learning all of these techniques and implementing them together, it's really going to allow you to have the best blending results that you can. And by learning the fundamentals of how to use your colouring pencils and how to blend pencils, it's going to enable you to really use these pencils in the way that you want to get the results that you want. Blending really is the core thing with coloured pencils, so it's very important to learn how to blend pencils. So I really hope that you did enjoy today's video and you picked up lots of helpful tips on how to blend your coloured pencils. I hope this was helpful if you are a beginner as well, and if it was, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn the notification bell on as well, because I upload videos here every single week. As always guys, keep creating and I'll see you soon. Bye!